Genetics is a field of biology that studies how traits are passed from parents to their offspring, which is a process we call heredity. Heredity is what makes children look like their parents. At the basic level, we have DNA, which is the underlying code that all life is based on. Every living thing requires DNA. Sequences of DNA, called genes, are contained inside chromosomes. Humans have around 20,000 genes in total, and, as I mentioned previously, 46 chromosomes, 23 of which are replicated from each parent during reproduction. Every single time reproduction occurs, mutations occur too. A mutation is simply a small difference in the DNA sequences, small changes in the genetic code. The vast majority of mutations are neutral, but some can create negative traits, and some can create positive traits. Over time, positive traits will be selected for, like the beaks on Darwin's finches, and negative traits will be filtered out. Positive really just means mutations or traits that make the organism more likely to pass on its genes. And this goes a long way to explaining why, when we look at the fossil record, life evolves to be more complex. If we look at part of the tree of life, where everything that evolved from tetrapods, we can see that amphibians, reptiles, and birds are separate from the mammals. And within mammals, marsupials are further separated from humans than monkeys, cats, and rabbits are. If this is indeed how life evolved, species which are similar to other must surely have lots of similar genes, and species which are further removed from each other must have less. There are multiple ways to test this today. One method is by looking at the genes of a protein called cytochrome C, which is found in every living organism. Everyone. Proteins are made up of amino acids, and the cytochrome C protein has around 100 of these amino acids in a chain. Humans and chimpanzees have the exact same cytochrome C protein. Exactly the same. Compare it to monkeys, the difference is 1 amino acid. That's one difference out of 100. Compare it to rabbits, and it's 9. Compared to pigeons, and it's 12. Compared to the bullfrog, it's 20. Compared to the fruit fly, it's 24. Then we've got wheat germ and yeast, which are even further removed. This is exactly what evolution predicted. The further removed from a species we are, the more changes we see in the cytochrome C protein. But it's exactly the same with chimpanzees. This is the gene which, when it mutates, can cause cystic fibrosis. The more green the bars are, the more similar the genetic code is to humans. The gene in chimpanzees is at least 99% identical. Orangutans, which are the 4th closest animal to humans after chimps, bonobos, and gorillas, have slightly more differences, including a completely different section here. Baboons, which are monkeys, have slightly more differences again, including a larger missing part. And this goes all the way down the primates till we get to mice. Still mammals, of course, but with quite a lot of differences. Then chickens, which are birds, are even further removed. Very, very little shared genetic code there. And then we get to the pufferfish at the bottom. This is exactly what evolution predicted. It is exactly what we see with cytochrome C. And it's exactly what we see in the fossil record. So, if proteins are similar between closely related species, and genes are too, what else must be similar? How about chromosomes? Marsupials, while they are still mammals, are a subgroup including animals living in South America and Australia. The vast majority of South American marsupials have 14 chromosomes, and some species have 18 or 22. Even though they now exist far apart, we would still expect the Australian marsupials to have similar numbers of chromosomes. The Tasmanian devil has 14, koalas and kangaroos have 16, all in the same ballpark as we'd expect from species which have evolved from common ancestors. Now, it's important to note that chromosome count alone cannot tell you what kind of species it is. For example, here we can see garlic also has 16 chromosomes. And there's clearly quite a lot of difference between garlic and a kangaroo and a koala. What's important here is that species which we believe evolved most recently from a common ancestor have similar counts. Cats have 38 chromosomes, mice have got 40, rabbits have got 44. And around about this point in the tree, we can be fairly confident that the ancestor of mice, rabbits and cats probably had between 38 and 44 chromosomes, and that would likely have been 40 or 42. Sperm whales have 42, right smack in mammal territory where you'd expect to see them. Now, the great white shark could well have around 42 as well, as I just discussed. However, that would have been mere coincidence. In fact, the great white shark has 82. And you remember that whale hippo thing that I talked about earlier? Hippos have 36. So is this perfect evidence of evolution? Well, not quite. Because dogs have 78. How can that be possible? Does that mean that dogs are more like sharks? The answer to that is of course no. To be frank, counting chromosomes in this way is pretty far from being an exact science. When new species evolve, they can create new chromosomes by splitting current ones, or they can combine chromosomes their ancestors had, reducing the overall number. The last common ancestor between dogs and cats lived 40 million years ago. We can't know for sure, but it likely had somewhere around 50 chromosomes. Cats have combined a bunch of them, and dogs have split a bunch since that point 40 million years ago. What would be a real problem for evolution would be if wolves and jackals, dingoes, dogs and coyotes had wildly different chromosome counts, as they have clearly all descended from a common ancestor. But they don't. In fact, they've all got 78, with the two exceptions of the bush dog and maned wolves on 74 and 76 respectively. Tigers and lions, 38, the same as a domestic cat, and every other cat, as expected. What is actually important about this though is the genes. It's the DNA, and that's where we see the most similarities between similar species. The real reason I started talking about chromosomes here was to show you what happened with primates. The group of animals of which we humans are part of. Monkeys are a large group and generally have between 42 and 48 chromosomes, with some outliers. Baboons are an old world monkey and they have 42. When we get to the great apes, orangutans, gorillas, chimpanzees, bonobos and humans, if evolution is true, then the last common ancestor of all must have lived around about 28 million years ago. We keep finding different skulls, going back a few tens of millions of years, then a few million years, a few 100,000 years, and then a few tens of thousands of years, until we get to the human skull. We never ever find any of these skulls, or any part of primate fossils, next to Archaeopteryx, or the dinosaurs, or trilobites, because they were all extinct before primates existed. And what's more, the further back the fossils go, the more we see evidence of walking on all four limbs, instead of the bipedal motion of humans today. The first fossils we found of a species which walked upright, Homo erectus, is dated at 2 million years. Since then we've discovered more and more, and we now believe bipedal motion evolved around about 4.4 million years ago in a species called Ardipithecus ramidus. Although it very likely walked upright, judging by its skull, it would have looked much more like an ape than a human. All other fossils found before this period indicate that primates were small animals walking on all fours. But with monkeys having 42 to 48 chromosomes, and humans having 46 chromosomes, you might think that the other great apes, the chimps, bonobos, gorillas and orangutans, would be very likely to have 46 too. But they don't. They all have 48. There are two options for why that is, and one of them is much more likely than the other. Orangutans aren't shown on this, but they also have 48 chromosomes, remember. So that means that either all of our common ancestors had 48 chromosomes, and humans combined two of them, or our common ancestor had 46, and all the other great apes gained two. Clearly, the vastly more likely explanation is the first. Our ancestor had 48 and humans combined two of them. In which case, evolutionary biology says that we will surely find evidence of that in our genes. Here is a comparison of human, chimp, gorilla and orangutan chromosomes from left to right. And you've probably noticed I've blanked out number 2 for now. As you can see, they're all fairly similar lengths and shapes, which is what evolution would suggest. Mutations are happening every generation, but it's generally not so fast that we normally see huge changes between similar species. And then you get to chromosome 2. Or I should say, chromosome 2 in humans, chromosome 2A and 2B in the other great apes. These are actual chromosomes that you will find in any member of each species if you look at their cells under a microscope. So, What has happened here with chromosome 2? Zooming in a bit and it looks like a little join there, where the others are clearly separate chromosomes. Chromosomes contain various different parts, and almost all of them have a single centromere, which is normally but not always near the centre of the chromosome, hence the name, and also 2 telomeres, one at each end. Telomeres kinda stop the DNA from unravelling, a bit like the little thing at the end of shoelaces. And when we look at human chromosome 2, we find that there are 2 telomeres in the middle and at the ends, and we also have 2 centromeres. However, one of them has been switched off, leaving a single working centromere a bit further down than the usual. Zooming in even further to the actual DNA code, we can see the fusion point. If human chromosome 2 isn't a combination of these 2 genes, which came from a common ancestor we shared with the other great apes, then please tell me what in the name of creation it is. And the kicker? Both Homo neanderthalensis, Neanderthals, and Denisovans, the 2 closest species to humans, but both now sadly extinct, they have the same fusion point in their second chromosome. It's very difficult to get a complete picture of their DNA, as DNA breaks down and it gets very messy over time. However, this fusion point having been found means that both of those species almost certainly had 46 chromosomes too. And genetics is extremely cool stuff. Each of these letters is called a nucleotide, and there are 4 in DNA called thymine, the T, cytosine, the C, adenine, the A, and guanine, the G. And if we compare human and chimp DNA sequences, this is for the gene that encodes the hormone leptin. We only see 5 nucleotide differences out of 250. So this does the exact same thing in humans and chimps, and there are only 5 differences in the gene. And where the human and chimpanzees differ, the corresponding nucleotide in the gorilla, which is the green shaded bar, that can be used to show us what the most likely setup was in the common ancestor of all 3 species. So in this first case, both the human and the gorilla have A, the chimp has G. It's much more likely that the common ancestor had A, and the chimps mutated to G. And it's the opposite story for the next one, and we can see this looking at the other remaining nucleotides. And that brings us to the end of this evolution mini-series. Darwin was correct, and the evidence for evolution is overwhelming.